Fantastic. Everyone should have gotten the alert. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful Senate sponsor of this clean slate legislation, Senator-elect Curtis Trent. Thanks for being with us, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everyone else for being here. I appreciate your interest in this legislation. So kind of what brought this on is we realized that only about 1% of Missourians who are eligible for expungement are currently receiving it. And of course, we want people to be able to take advantage of the expungement laws in this state and be able to have those benefits. And so this legislation would, of course, would kind of automate the process that is already available. It would seal minor offenses following a period of crime-free conduct. An individual must serve their full sentence. And of course, it doesn't apply to violent offenses. It's only for the select offenses that are available. And the benefits, of course, to expungement are many. People have better access to housing, employment opportunities. They're able to kind of start over in life and without having the past offenses hanging over them at every interview that they go to, at every apartment they try to rent, those sorts of things. Once people pay their debt to society, they should have an opportunity to start over. They should have a clean slate. That's what this legislation is intended to do. And I think will do, and I'm very hopeful that it will be passed in this upcoming legislative session. Other states are doing this. I think it's just already the law in places like Oklahoma and Utah. So it's something that's very doable, and I think we have a very good grasp of the benefits that will accrue to society if we're able to get this done. So again, appreciate everyone's interest in this, raising public awareness and support for this issue. Appreciate the folks I've been working with on this legislation, and I think you're going to hear from some of them here in a second, and our House sponsor as well. So with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Senator. Yeah, and you teed it up perfectly, because we're going to head over to our House sponsor, Representative Phil Christofanelli.
Hi there, folks. I'm Phil Christofanelli from St. Charles County. I represent the 105th, soon to be 104th legislative district. We got some great information from my soon to be former colleague, Curtis Trent, who's moving over to the Senate. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to go about implementing this bill, or the bill plans to be implemented. Under Missouri law, if you want to get expunged right now, you have to go through essentially a court petition, and that costs a lot of money and a lot of time. And so that's probably why we're only seeing 1% of people utilize these services. I'll just tell you, in my law practice, we'd have to charge several $1,000s if we didn't do this pro bono. So it's a barrier for entry for people who otherwise would be eligible to go through the process and come up with those funds. So we want to create an automated process for expungement. And so that would automatically expunge misdemeanor convictions after 3 years and felony convictions after 5 years if the felony is eligible. Certainly there's a lot of felonies that would not be eligible if they involve violent crime or things of that nature. But we're talking mostly about the non-violent stuff here. And then the legislation creates a process. There'll be an algorithm in state government through which we identify who all the eligible persons are. And we will ship those names and records over to the courthouses, and then the courts can do essentially an omnibus order sealing those records within their courthouse. The bill is going to take a couple years, 30 months, in order to get up and running, because we're going to have to do some tech changes. We're going to have to do some programming. And we're also got a notification system that we're going to put into this bill, so that people can first find out that they're eligible, learn about the process. We're going to have the courts make sure that they tell them at sentencing. We're going to have their probation and parole officers let them know about how the process works, and we're going to have an online portal that people can go on and check that their convictions has in fact been expunged. And so this is really important. It's important to my community because we're in a workforce crisis right now, and we want as many people going back to work as possible. And we want to prevent recidivism. There's crime that we know is on the rise in our area, and one of the reasons for that is not people don't have access to housing and they don't have access to jobs. So I think this is a common sense bill to let people take advantage of the rights that we afford them under the law without an exorbitant cost. And so I'm looking forward to sponsoring it in the House and pushing it through the process.
Thank you, Representative. With that, I'm going to turn it over to a few of our community leaders who've been working on this legislation. Up first, I'd like to introduce Greg Smith. Greg is the Executive Director at the Missouri Coalition of Recovery Support Providers. He and his organization have been very involved in working on this legislation over the last year because it will have a huge impact on folks who are in the recovery process and who have a past criminal offense that is related to their addiction. So really happy to have Greg here with us today.
Thanks, Mallory. Yeah, we represent 126 different peer, faith, and community-based addiction recovery programs across the state. 15% of offenders who are in prison are there for drug offenses, and it's actually higher for women. It's about 20%. And actually, if you take a big look at the picture, about 86%, I believe, of offenders in prison have substance use issues. So it's not just people who are convicted of drug offenses, it's also people who have been convicted of property offenses and other things. So one of the main reasons we really got involved in this is at my church here in Jefferson City, we had a couple who were husband and wife, both had felony convictions, but they could not get housing, and they were actually paying $600 a month for a plot to house a tent so they could live in a tent. So, this affects everybody. We're all about people being able to move on with their lives and having second chances. And I think this legislation will do a lot to move that along.
Thanks so much, Greg. I am going to turn it over now to Crista Hogan. Crista is the Executive Director at the Springfield Metropolitan Bar Association, and their organization has been doing a significant amount of work on expungement over the last couple of years, working through the petition-based process. And so she has some really great insights to share about the difficulties in that process and why an automated process is going to be so important for Missouri. Crista?
Thanks, Mallory. We got invested in this in 2018 when the 610-140, the kind of broad petition-based expungement was passed. And that was a big deal in the legal community because they went from approximately 17 offenses that were expungible to nearly 2,000. And so we immediately thought that this would be a great thing to do for the community to help families become more self-sustaining, right? With employment opportunities being opened up, with educational attainment opportunities, with housing, and just let allow everybody to get off the sidelines and become more self-sufficient. So we started hosting clinics in 2018, and the law has been refined a bit almost every year since then. But if you look at the number of people just here in Greene County who are likely eligible for this, there's probably tens of thousands of people who are eligible for expungement. And yet, since 2018, despite some pretty robust and successful efforts in getting the word out and helping people get access to expungement, only 50 people a year have gotten across the finish line with the petition-based expungement, which is kind of mortifying, because we've gotten the word out. We've had some great media coverage, We've even, Representative Christofanelli mentioned the legal fees being a couple $1,000s, and that's pretty standard. We've got almost everyone can access that for free through our partnership with Legal Services of Southern Missouri. So we're getting a free lawyer. And even then, it's not getting done. It is expensive. The filing fee is sometimes just in that in of itself. It's, I think, possibly the highest filing fee of any other petition-based process. It's $250. And then to my knowledge, there's also some fees with regard to like recording, or rather record search. I'm a lawyer and I would never attempt to do this. There are forms online, and the idea was people could get access to it pro se, but I would never attempt to do it because it's complicated. And also if you mess up, then, you've messed up for a pretty long period of time before you can file again. So, we come to this, or I, come to this idea of, automatic expungement by operation of law, because if the intention when the bill was passed in 2018 was to actually help people, get a fresh start, it's not working. And so, when you look at that, we have to figure out, well, what would possibly work. So that's how we come to the table with regard to automatic expungement.
Thanks so much, Crista. Our last speaker for today is Katie Sinquefield. Katie's also been working with us over this last year on sort of scoping and building a good understanding of this legislation. She's become an incredible criminal justice advocate across the state, and we're really excited to have her support on the Clean Slate initiative. So I wanted to invite her to share a few thoughts as well. Katie?
Thanks, Mallory. So in Missouri, approximately 1.8 million adults have a criminal record, and this mirrors the national trend that 1 in 3 adults has interacted with the criminal justice system. A national analysis of criminal record data suggests that there would be about 500,000 Missourians that could benefit from the Clean Slate legislation. So you've heard my colleagues speak a lot about the impact of criminal record on employment and housing. These issues, to me, would be a compelling enough argument for automatic sealing of low-level offenses. Unfortunately, the ramifications of a record are much broader. A record impacts a person's ability to fully participate in their child's life, often limiting their ability to volunteer at school, coach sports teams, or even serve as a scout leader. A record can also impact licensing for a number of professions, locking them out of meaningful career pathways. A record can prevent individuals from going back to school and pursuing higher education. It can impact admissions and eligibility for financial aid. Fortunately, the benefits of Clean Slate go far beyond the individual who's been granted expungement. A record can impact an entire family. One of the women interviewed for the Missouri Clean Slate campaign, Fran Marion, noted that her children are doing a life sentence with her because she tried to cash a stolen $700 check. She said currently she struggles to keep food on the table and a roof over their head because it's been difficult to secure stable employment with a felony record. Clean Slate would help entire families. Beyond that, studies have shown that expungement decreases recidivism, which helps keep our community safer. And as you've heard today, it benefits the economy by boosting the number of gainfully employed adults, which is a benefit to all of us.
Thanks so much, Katie. All right. Well, with that, I would love to turn it over to our reporters, the media that are in the room, and take any questions that you all might have. Feel free to just come off mute, or if you want to raise your hands using the little raise hand function, either of those are fine. Galen.
Hi, thanks all for doing this. I was wondering, this is for Senator-elect Trent and Representative Christofanelli, if you all had conversations with leadership in the chambers about this legislation, if this was something that they had indicated they were sort of interested in advancing throughout the session.
Well, I haven't had a specific conversation on this piece of legislation with leadership, but I will tell you that there has been growing interest in criminal justice reform in the Missouri House. In the last 2 years, we've had, I think it's the last 2 sessions, we've had a special committee on criminal justice that explicitly pipelined a lot of these reforms. And so that, to me, demonstrates that our leadership has identified this as a caucus priority. Generally, we know that I've heard from the leadership team that addressing the rising crime rates is going to be a focus in the upcoming session. And I've always emphasized that we need to look not only at the penalty side of criminal justice, but also reducing the recidivism where we see a lot of the criminal activity occurring. And I think that this is part of the effort to address crime in our community. And I think that it will continue to be a priority for many, many members of our caucus.
Yeah, I would echo those comments. This isn't the first major piece of criminal justice reform oriented legislation that the General Assembly has done. I don't think it's going to be the last either. I think that as we get a better grip on how well these types of reforms do in creating benefit to society, helping individual outcomes, that there's going to continue to be an increased appetite to do more legislation along these lines. And I think that, I expect a great deal of support from the rest of the General Assembly as we go through the process on this particular bill.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for, holding this. This has been really helpful. Ms. Hogan had mentioned that there was only 50 each year that get across the finish line. How will this legislation help to increase this number? And do you have an approximation about how many people you think it will impact now, making these adjustments to make the process more streamlined?
Krista, I don't know if you have.
Sorry, as I was waiting for someone else to answer. The 50 a year, those are the Greene County numbers. That's from 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. So I don't have 22, but I don't have any great optimism about it, dramatically spiking. I feel like there's the fact that people aren't proceeding with the petition-based process. They may start it and not finish it. They may not actually get, to the lawyer's office. I just feel like it's just the reasons are not just financial. I think they're more complicated than that. I feel like it's a drag to have a criminal record, right? And our purpose of our punishment, I mean, what we're doing is we are defeating people, right? We are getting the upper hand. We're punishing them with sort of a defeat process, and then we have defeatism, right? And so I feel like there's a emotional, psychological component to it that prevents people from proceeding. That's all speculation, because there doesn't seem to be a practical reason why people aren't getting it done, at least here where we can get it done pretty much for free. So doing it by operation of law or automatically, people wouldn't have to do anything affirmative. They wouldn't have to petition. They wouldn't have to pay. They wouldn't have to do anything. All they'd have to do is what they're already doing, which is not get into trouble again. That's the point of this legislation is, and I feel like it really goes back to the spirit of the legislation that I think was carried by Senator Dixon in 2018, which did, really broadened the expungement eligibility, which was to actually, get people access to this. I think that at the time they didn't realize, that it might not have the impact that was desired because of all of the complications and components. Is that a pretty good? Does that kind of?
Oh yeah.
Did I miss anything?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to see if I could get you to say it in a nutshell. Thank you so much.
I can quickly add one thing to that, Rebecca. There was a national analysis done by the National Clean Slate Initiative, who's been supporting these efforts in states across the country. They believe, from a look at our data, that there are about 500,000 folks who will benefit from this legislation within the first couple of years. The exact number is 518,000. So we do believe that it will be a hugely impactful policy if and when it's passed. Other questions?
When you say 500,000, you mean Missouri, in Missouri, or
In Missouri.
okay?
Yeah, the numbers, I know when I first heard the numbers, I thought they were pretty shocking. I thought that 1.8 million number that Katie mentioned, I thought that was, it seemed so high, but we've verified it across a number of channels, and yeah, 1.8 million adults within the state of Missouri. Yeah, Rebecca.
Okay, I'll just have one more follow-up, but I've just kind of been following the expungement process that's going to happen here, well, starting this week with Amendment 3 going into effect, and just hearing from the courts about how getting the cases in line to get the orders out, it's just going to take a lot of manpower. And I noticed that this process is going to be over several years to get things in place. I guess just, how has the courts been involved in this process, and have they had input on how to make the process go smoothly? And yeah, how can the state legislature support that process, all those things?
I have a few thoughts, but if either of our sponsors have thoughts, I want to defer to them first.
I can tell you that I've been having conversations with our local judiciary and some of the representatives from the Supreme Court, because we want them to be involved. Remember, this is just a sponsored bill, a starting point, and we're going to have many committee hearings between now and final passage, and those are really opportunities for the legal community at large to give input on how best to structure this to avoid unnecessary cost and unnecessary work from our judiciary. So I'm very open if we have to change things or modify them in order to make this easier to implement, and I think that will come to light through the legislative process.
Yeah, and keep in mind that we're beginning with a very large body of eligible population that has built up over a period of time. And once we work through that population, there should be a smaller, more manageable number on a year-to-year basis once all that backlog is dealt with. And of course, the General Assembly provides funding to the courts. And, I think that's part of the conversation. If there is like a short-term personnel or resources issue that needs to be dealt with, that can all be part of the conversation too.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. What groups of people do you guys see seeing the most immediate benefit from automatic expungement? Is there a group, you've listed that the group that could see potential impacts is very large. Are there groups in particular that would see a more immediate effect?
My perception is that this is going to affect people from all walks of life in Missouri. There are people who have all kinds of different issues. Some of the offenses are drugs, some of them are other types of minor nonviolent crime. And there are friends and neighbors, there are people all around us that made a bad decision one time, and they've tried to move on from that now, and this is to try to help them move on to a new chapter of their life.
Unfortunately, our criminal justice system makes addiction a criminal justice issue, and people that suffer from addiction are typically the ones with the longest records of multiple offenses, and it becomes a perpetual cycle where the offenses they've racked up have limited their options for fruitful engagement in society, and then they revert to their addiction. And so that is the cycle that I think we're trying to break with this legislation, to give people a chance to engage in fruitful participation in our society and avoid the dangers of returning to drugs or alcohol or whatever their addiction may be.
And a quick follow-up on that, connecting this to Amendment 3 a little bit. I know a lot of Amendment 3's critics have been frustrated with the expungement process listed in Amendment 3 as not necessarily being automatic in the way that people would hope. I know some language says, like may instead of shall, for example. There's like a limited time period with Amendment 3 to get some expungement done. Do you think more widespread, broad expungement can address some of those problems that Amendment 3's critics have had with, well, I know Amendment 3 specifically talks about marijuana, but do you think more broad expungement can address some of those concerns?
Yeah, and I think that's important to focus on. Amendment 3, as I'm sure you know, deals only with marijuana-related offenses, which are, a significant but small portion of all the offenses that would be covered by this more comprehensive legislation. And quite frankly, I believe as a legislator in the legislative process, this bill is going to be vetted by many committees. As I discussed before, it's going to have wide public participation in its crafting. And I believe that as a result, we will get a well thought out and effective expungement process. And with ballot propositions of any variety, those go straight from the folks that have drafted them to the ballot box without that weaning process of the legislative system. And so I think that as a result of the work that we do in the legislature, we will get a bill that works.
Any final questions before we close out? Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you to Senator-elect Trent and Representative Christofanelli, as well as Greg and Crista and Katie, for not only for being here today, but for all of their work on this really important issue. If you do have follow-up questions and want to be able to get in touch with any of our panelists here today, feel free to reach out to Amber Foster Hobart, who you've likely been in connection with to be with us here today. She can help arrange any of those follow-up conversations, as well as can get you a copy of this recording if you need it. And with that, I will send you all back to your days. Thank you so much for being here.